Okay, so I am playing a little snippet from our friend Emerson Green, the atheist. Yeah, the atheist. I am commandeering a section of his work. Basically, he borrowed the concept from Felipe Leon, and I couldn't find. I looked for a couple, went through a couple of Felipe Leon videos to try and find, but I couldn't find as good a little breakdown as this little snippet right here. So I'm gonna let Emerson Green take it away.
I do think that naturalists typically, especially in philosophy, there are people who believe that science pretty much informs us as to what's real, and like the elements of physical science, like that's basically it. Um, so that's like a very strict form of naturalism, but
He's going to call that a conservative naturalist. That is also pretty much a logical positivist. That was the whole point of the movement. Only that which can be empirically verified for it has any meaning. And then the obvious rejoinder, can you empirically verify for that statement? Well, no, I cannot. Okay, so your philosophy is, if your philosophy is true, then your philosophy is false. Correct? Correct. Now, the reason why I'm doing this, why I'm giving the floor to Emerson Green, although he be atheist, is that he's going to split the naturalist into three camps: a conservative naturalist, I think this is a really good way to think about this stuff, and he's going to label himself, in the end, a spooky naturalist. So I'm going to interrupt him briefly and comment on what he says, because there's I'm going somewhere with all of this. I think that this is actually really helpful.
that's not a bad like starting point. It's like, okay, well, what's real is the stuff that science tells us about, and like that exhausts concrete reality. That's what naturalism means. And then there's a more like moderate form of naturalism, like, okay, maybe there are, in addition to those concrete things that science tells us about, there are all these abstract objects, um, like propositions or like non-natural like moral truths or something. And then there are liberal naturalists who add more things to their ontology, like some concrete stuff that most naturalists would not get on board with. But you're still not going for anything that people typically call supernatural, like
Okay, so the first two categories of naturalist, what he's calling strict naturalist or conservative naturalist, is really kind of a logical positivist. They're trying to allow for nothing in their ontology that cannot be empirically verified for, and they're saying that the physical sciences exhaust everything. The second is a more moderate, which is allowing for things. It's not quite clear what that allows for, but in those first two camps, that is where you find 80% of the atheist community, 80% of most atheists. Most atheists don't really know philosophy well enough to actually know what they are, but they're usually scientismists, and they're usually really close to logical positivists. The reason why I'm doing this is, if you go back to my presuppositional argument, my whole point of the presup is a different version of it, wherein, see, I don't know offhand, but I would guess that Emerson Green likes Thomas Nagel. Thomas Nagel is actually controversial with a certain type of. I'm going to do a breakdown. I have this thing that popped up in my notifications. Emerson Green references Sean Carroll. Sean Carroll is pretty much on the page of the physical scientists exhaust everything, and that's all you need. And he had a conference called Moving Naturalism Forward, where he invited like a who's who of the most, basically all the most conservative, strict naturalists you could find. The matter in motion is all there is crew, as I call them. Most of them you heard of, or some of them you heard of. Richard Dawkins, everyone's heard of him, correct? Daniel Dennett, Alex Rosenberg. Alex Rosenberg is probably the most committed and the most strict and conservative in the matter in motion is all there is crew. Now, their ontology is not good enough. That's the point. In their epistemology, they do not allow for enough entities in their ontology. So if I'm going to show you when I break down Tyler Vila's argument with Matt Dillon. If you scale back his ambition, philosophically, Tyler Vila's presuppositional apologetic is on terra firma. If you're just talking about the philosophy itself, borrows liberally from Kant and in the reality of transcendental categories, okay, And he uses Thomas Nagel as a cautionary tale, whereas I use Thomas Nagel as the goal. So you can turn what I call dumbass atheist, but it could also be, a strict, but what Emerson and I guess collectively will call a conservative or a strict naturalist isn't good enough. Their ontology doesn't account for not enough in the world as it actually occurs. This is what I was trying to argue for when I was talking about my coherent theory of atheism video. If you have an atheist and there's no theists to kick around, okay, there's no theists around. Imagine a world where there's no theism. So you can't duck the question. You can't go, you're the one making a positive claim, Craig. I don't have to cover anything. You know how many people said that to me? Atheism doesn't account for anything. All it does is not believe in your God. That's it. Okay, that's fine if you are facing off against a theist. If there's no theist around and you aren't facing off against anybody, then it is your job as someone who is, wants to clearly understand the world. And this is why I did it this way, is to point out that, the two types of naturalism, conservative naturalism and moderate naturalism, that entails almost every atheist, about 80%, except for Emerson Green here, and some, pointy head atheists who are more philosophical in nature. The guy I had on my channel, Eric S. Reinhardt, called himself a Platonic atheist. So it basically is almost everyone in the atheist community isn't good enough. It isn't good enough. Ontologically speaking, there aren't enough entities in their epistemology to account for the world as it actually occurs. And once you start allowing in entities by necessity, things like mathematical axioms, abstract objects, things like that, then you have to open yourself up and you have to move. It goes back to the question, your metaphysical a priori assumptions about the world. Are they robust? Are they defensible? Are they true and coherent? And if they're not, you got to move, because the evidence demands such. To push the argument to the point where it proves a God is asking too much. To just adhere to the logical form of the argument, the pristine logic that undergirds it, where the evidence clearly shows that you have to move. See, in Sean Carroll's Moving Naturalism Forward, I tried to explain this in one of the videos. I haven't put it out yet. There are three big elephants in the room. One is Thomas Nagel, and he's like persona non grata. They kind of act like he's Trump. Basically, it's like you're at a Democratic National Committee and he's Trump. The other are what they call intentionality, but what they mean by intentionality is what Emerson just talked about: abstractions, abstract objects, mathematical axiom, laws of logic, things like that. Things that have no spatial, temporal locality and yet exist. That's the point. Your naturalism has to be flexible enough to account for them. Why? Because they are there as part of the construct of reality, as provable fact. You get it? Didn't say it all that clearly, but I think most people will get it. And it doesn't really matter, because this is just the beginning of me unpacking it. So let's listen to Emerson wrap it up and then define himself as a spooky naturalist.
Gods or angels or heaven or a prayer or something like that. It's like you're still recognizably a naturalist, in part because you're still an atheist or an agnostic. In philosophy of religion, that's like a big part of what naturalism means. It's just that you're an atheist or an agnostic. Whereas outside of philosophy of religion, it seems to be more concerned with like, you believe in the things that science tells us about and not really much else, at least when it comes to the concrete world. But yeah, so Felipe Leon uses this organization where you've got like naturalists, you've got moderate naturalists, and then you've got liberal naturalists. So the conservative naturalists are the ones who it's just the stuff that science tells us about, that exhausts all of reality. The moderate naturalists.
That's Sean Carroll, by the way, pretty much. That phrase, science exhausts, physics exhaust all of reality, I'm pretty sure that particular phrase is him. Now, I don't know if he calls himself a logical positivist, but that is basically logical positivism. And you'll see when I break down and analyze the Tyler Vila versus Matt Dillahunty debate, Matt Dillahunty brings up his epistemology right at the beginning and what he thinks is ontologically there. And he's really is pretty close to a logical positivist. Tyler Vila calls him that a few times, infers it, calls him that more than once in the debate, too much to the chagrin of Matt Dillahunty, but he is way too conservative a naturalist. So what I'm trying to point out here is Emerson Green is I'll show you what he says and then I'll comment. Well, I'll let him finish his sentence and then I'll tell you.
They believe in that as well, but they think that there are some abstracta in addition to that. And then the liberal naturalists, they add even more stuff to their ontology, and I'm more in that category. Like I sometimes self-deprecatingly call myself a spooky naturalist because I believe in all these things that most naturalists think are just kind of like spooky or like paranormal even. And I'm just so it started off as kind of like a joke, but now I actually kind of like the term.
I like the term a lot, and I'm borrowing it from you. Thank you very much, Emerson Green. I'm going to use it in the service of apologetics, though. So, I apologize for using it for apologetics. I love the term, actually, spooky naturalist, because that's the goal. To go into a debate and to prove God, particularly someone like Matt Dillahunty, okay, that's not an achievable goal. That ain't going to happen. But to go into a debate where you examine the philosophical underpinnings of Matt Dillahunty, his worldview, this is what the pre-suppers try to do. They just do it inartfully. There's not all of them do it inartfully, by the way. There's a few pre-suppers out there, Tyler Vila, Jay Dyer, and a guy who's very influenced by Jay Dyer. I forget what his name is, but I'll be analyzing one or two of his debates in the near future. He's really, really strong, like really strong. The mistake that they all make is they try to push the argument further than the logic entails. Okay, if you just stick to the logical core of the philosophy, Tyler Vila would have been able, maybe potentially, to move Matt Dillahunty in the debate to his reasonable middle ground. You're not going to prove God to Matt Dillahunty. You're not going to get him to acknowledge God in the debate. That's not an achievable goal. But he did, in fact, admit, yes, the laws of logic exist. They are immaterial, inviolate, other than matter and motion, transcendent. Okay, so he is allowing for something that has no spatial temporal locality, and he literally said, yet it exists. Okay, can't be empirically verified for. So that's already pretty much the victory. If you move the atheist, and you could probably have a conversation. It doesn't have to be a contentious debate. Just get them to examine what their metaphysical a priori assumptions are about the world. Why? Because most atheists are too close to logical positivism. I was about to call you Nathan. Emerson here is more accurate. He's more philosophical than most atheists. He's also smarter than a lot of atheists, but he's also more honest than a lot of atheists. His epistemology allows for things that most atheists won't allow for. Why? Because they are basically there as provable fact for the most part. Now, I'm not talking about demons, gods, angels, anything supernatural. I'm talking about the things that are controversial, that fall within the boundaries of, can still be defined sort of within the confines of the natural world. The stuff that he mentioned, mathematical axiom, transcendent categories, there's a whole bunch of things that fall in this middle territory. The point is, you can move the atheist into this middle ground. And what you are in effect doing, now I don't think Emerson is ready to admit this or ready to say that he is somewhere in between atheism and theism. But the Platonic atheist Eric S. Reinhardt, I would say he is. I don't think once you allow for the ontological realities of things that are actually there as provable fact, I don't think you can go back to pure atheism. That's the point. You have landed some middle ground somewhere in between theism and atheism. Why? Of necessity. Because you had to. For the same reason the pre-suppers say, it is the precondition of intelligibility. Precondition of intelligibility is located in the transcendent realm. Your sense-making apparati, what we use to make sense of the world, that means metaphysics, that means all forms of abstracta, are located in the transcendent realm. The reason why this certain type of atheist philosopher going all the way back to Hume has tried to rule these things out of the realm of possibility is for exactly the reason that Emerson just said, because they are not sciency enough. They're not sciency. They're too spooky. They're too weird. They're if you go too far, they're woo. And if you go too far in the other direction, you have logical positivism. But there's a comfortable middle ground here where we could just deal with the abstracta that are there as entities that are provable fact and make every atheist acknowledge these are there as provable fact and meet us in the middle territory. Does everyone understand where I'm going with this? I think that was pretty crystal clear. The logic of this is really good. It's really strong. I might not have said it well enough in this particular video for you to understand that this is a game changer, but this is actually a game changer. Why? Because it can't, you have to acknowledge, and first of all, there's not a single atheist that I can think of that would not say, yes, the laws of logic exist, and then define them as they're immaterial, transcendent, invisible, other than matter and motion. Some will dispute that they are purely psychological, and then some will try to dispute falsely that they are descriptions only. They're not, they're prescriptive. They are laws of logic. Laws are by definition prescriptive. If you break the law, you have illogic. You have a logical contradiction. They are laws. They are prescriptive. Just calling them descriptive doesn't make any sense. They're laws, absolutely. Laws of logic. Entailed in the definition of a law is inviolate. You cannot violate this or you have what? A logical contradiction. Now, that's only one category, though, of transcendent categories. I don't want to get into that, go down that path. Yes, there's some debate, philosophical debate to be had over whether there are there's some controversy over the laws of logic. They aren't quite a slam dunk, but at least one or two of them are still a slam dunk. The point is you can get almost every atheist, every reasonable, intelligent atheist to acknowledge that they exist. And there are other entities out there that you could get almost every reasonable, intelligent atheist to acknowledge exist. Once you have that, then you can clearly point out, without any fanfare, without any melodrama, look, you are a spooky naturalist a la Emerson Green. So you can move someone from Aaron Raland, I'm a dumbass atheist, to an Emerson Green, sophisticated intellect atheist. Don't think it'll be all that hard. Shouldn't be. Why? Because Emerson Green is in the right place. He's not, so far he hasn't mentioned anything that every other atheist would go, oh, you got no evidence for that, right? So let me finish. I'll let him finish the thought, and then we'll see if I post the video.
But yeah, I mean that's kind of how I view naturalism. It does help to start talking about science first, I guess, and okay, here's what we know from science. Is that all there is? Is Sean Carroll right that the core theory exhausts all of our everyday world, and there's nothing over and above this equation that we can put on a whiteboard?
No, Sean Carroll is wrong. And as evidence of the fact that Sean Carroll is wrong is Sean Carroll called a group of the most conservative naturalists he could find, the creme de la creme of the matter and motion is all there is crew, and he called it Moving Naturalism Forward. Just the title alone. He didn't call it Naturalism Exhausts Everything There Is and Here's Why, or Naturalism is Winning the Day and Here's Why. It's Moving Naturalism Forward. And there was some deep awareness in this group. There are three elephants that hang over the room. Thomas Nagel, Hard Problem of Consciousness, which Emerson Green knows well. By the way, I recommend his videos, all of his videos on philosophy of mind. I strongly recommend. They're probably the best atheist videos on the topic. They're the best. They may be the best. Recommend them all. Sean Carroll's Moving Naturalism Forward. So he corralled a group of the most sophisticated philosophers that he could find, handpicked them, who's who of the matter and motion, that all there is crew. Why? Because he recognizes to some degree that there isn't enough in their ontology. There is more under heaven and earth than is dreamed of in their philosophy. And they somewhat acknowledge it during the course of this lecture. I'll break down some of those videos maybe. I mean, they're a little too highbrow for most people, but it might, maybe I won't. They're a little bit too eggheady and cerebral. They're not tedious. I'm into them, but I'm not sure if everyone would be. The point is, okay, three elephants hang over the room. Thomas Nagel, who is persona non grata. Why? Because he's a spooky naturalist and committed to it. And could easily become a theist one day. Could easily become a theist, and then nobody would be surprised. Right? Once you start opening the door to spooky naturalism, you know, and you have to open the door to spooky naturalism. Why? Because it's necessary precondition of intelligibility in order for you to have they try to reconcile the world. And I will actually break down what they do, because they are trying to account for reality as it actually occurs using the most bareback conservative ontology, conservative forms of naturalism that will work. And they struggle to accomplish it. Why? They struggle to answer the hard problem of consciousness. Exactly the places you'd think they struggle, they struggle. And what they call intentionality, but what they mean by intentionality is what Emerson Green just said, you know, abstract objects, mathematical axioms, yada, yada, yada. All those type of things that are there but not there. Quite literally, they're there but aren't there. Aren't there? Why? So they have no spatial temporal locality, thus cannot be empirically verified for. They are there as provable fact. Why? Because we need them. I'll also break down the applicability of mathematics. Same problem with that. It doesn't work as an argument for God. As an argument for a robust ontology in between theism and atheism, slam dunk. It's a slam dunk. Do you get it? I admit I'm not saying it all that clearly. It's a little late. I'm trying to squeeze this in before my wife gets home. But I'm on a path that will produce much fruit. It's going to be a very fruitful path. Why? Because it's the truth. Everything I'm talking about is the truth. And there's a reasonable compromise to be had here in between theism and atheism. The point is in between theism and atheism. It's easy for theists to account for the abstracta that Emerson Green is talking about. Why are they just so hand in glove with theism? Platonic forms, Platonic realms, those are all things that almost all religions readily acknowledge and deal with all the time. As I've said, they say, you know, they can't all be right, but they can all be wrong. Well, they all say exactly the same thing. There's an unseen, invisible, immaterial world that undergirds and interacts with the known visible material world. All religions say that. All religions believe in some form of the forms. The only thing they are debating is what form those forms take. You understand? Are they polytheists? Is it a multiplicity of beings of polytheists? Is it a single being, Allah, Jesus, monotheist? Is it some sort of energy or a Taoist type thing? But they all agree there's an unseen, invisible, immaterial world that undergirds and interacts with the known visible material world. And guess what? There is as provable fact. That's why the transcendent categories are ultimately going to be so decisive. Guess what? There are as provable fact. A conservative naturalist is a logical positivist, is in a position that is self-refuting and doesn't work. A liberal naturalist or a spooky naturalist, which we can move everyone in the atheist community to who has a brain, they got to be smart. I mean, that's about it. It's pretty much most of them are smart enough. We can move everybody to. Why? Because it's coherent and makes sense and is robust and defensible. It is a totally defensible, robust, justifiable ontological position that accounts. The simplest thing that accounts for the most, that has the most explanatory power. It's straightforward, straightforward with the virtues. Does everyone get it? Are we there? We're going to be there. This is gonna go well for us. It's going to be fairly easy. Why? Because first of all, Emerson Green is an accomplished atheist. He's one of them, right? He says he's a spooky naturalist. He'll help us. That's what I said. Some of these philosophical atheists are more allies than opponents. Why? Because they get it. They might not get it enough to be theists, but they get it. They're smart and they're on the right track with a lot of this stuff. So he's on the right track with a lot of this stuff. And that will ultimately help us. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. All right, let's let him finish it up, and then we'll wrap it up.
And then you can kind of move farther and farther away from that into like liberal naturalism.
Thank you. That's been fascinating. Well, you've enriched my understanding of the different varieties of naturalism, but you've also reassured me that it's okay to keep using naturalism as one of the two tenets of sentientism, even though it's fuzzy and pluralistic.
It's really fuzzy. That's why I almost never use naturalism. I use physicalism, because it's a lot more easy to understand what people mean by physicalism. Naturalism, a lot of people have different definitions. So it is fuzzy. That's one of the potential pitfalls.
I like that. That's one of the reasons I like it. So Cool. And we'll come back to some of the speakers.
Cool. So with that, that is all that she wrote. That is all for now. Kids, another slam dunk of a video, if I do say so myself. Kind of a masterpiece. Yeah, that might sound a little bit too much, but I think it's kind of a masterpiece, this particular video. So there you have it, kids. That is all for now. Mass is ended. As always, go in peace. Amen.